And with that, I'd like to welcome you and wish you good afternoon. My name is Melanie Roberts, and I'm Executive Director of the Washington State Academy of Sciences. Thanks so much for joining us for our third webinar in the Growing with AI webinar series, which is exploring how artificial intelligence could contribute to a resilient, secure, and economically viable future for agriculture in our state of Washington. Please note that we are recording these webinars and we'll make them available online along with our speaker slides. And you can go to our website now actually and find videos from our previous two overviews that we've held on AI technology, kind of 101, and an overview of agriculture in Washington. Today is the first of three 90-minute panels that are designed to dig a bit more deeply into a specific opportunity or challenge area. And as you saw, we're focusing on AI for climate and weather resilience today. And we have a diverse group of speakers who are experts in different areas of that. I want to give a big thanks to the Washington Department of Agriculture for helping to support this webinar series. And I also want to thank our planning committee members, some of us who are here on video today, and they're going to help us monitor your questions and comments and help with the Q&A session at the end. We have a half an hour reserved for discussion among the panelists and addressing some of your questions. Note that we have these three overarching questions that we're asking on climate and other things. Our stewards, the planning committee is looking at themes that cut across multiple webinars, all of our webinars, things like workforce, environmental impacts, data needs, etc. So they're really monitoring for those things. I also want to acknowledge that many online today are experts in your areas and have really valuable insights. Of course, it's hard to have a discussion with 200 people, so we would like to ask you to participate in a couple of ways. One is please use the Q&A section liberally. Share your thoughts, your comments, your questions for the panel. You might have to go to the bottom. There's three dots at the bottom of your screen that you might have to push to open the Q&A panel. And also feel free to use the reactions. I saw a few of you are already using the clapping and other functions on Zoom. The other thing, and you'll see this in chat, we're limited in the number of examples we're able to share during the webinar, but we want to make sure we're capturing the really interesting things that are happening in Washington or challenges that you've seen on the ground that you think might be amenable to AI-enabled solutions. So we have an online form to capture some of those things, and we're going to be recording them and publishing them in a synthesis report. So that if you have any stories to share, examples to share, you'll find the link to that in our chat. And with that, I would like to go ahead and hand things over to our host for today, Brad Colman. He is a distinguished atmospheric scientist who also happens to be a Washington State Academy of Science member and is part of the Growing with AI Planning Committee. With that, take it away, Brad.
Super. Thank you, Melanie, and welcome everyone. I'm really glad that all of you could join us today. As Melanie mentioned, I'm Brad Colman. I'm an atmospheric scientist. I spent my career building and using weather models from forecaster to lab director. I spent 38 years at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration doing research and working generally in public weather services. Then in about 2012, I moved over to private sector at Microsoft. And then my final professional stop was at the Climate Corporation and Bayer, where I got to combine two lifelong passions of mine, weather and gardening, although more accurately at that point, agriculture. At Climate, I worked on the Climate Field View platform, which some of you may know. I recently served as president of the American Meteorological Society, and I chair the National Academies of Sciences Board on Atmospheric Sciences and Climate. I'm genuinely excited about this webinar series on AI and agriculture. As I mentioned, my own career ended up right at that intersection of weather, climate, and ag. So it's just very personal to me and very exciting for me. I'm also a very proud native Washingtonian. I grew up enjoying the incredible produce grown in this state. And as a kid, I even spent time baling hay and picking green beans in the Green River Valley, back before much of it was replaced by warehouses and shopping malls that we see today. Washington agriculture is facing a growing set of pressures: atmospheric rivers, water supply volatility, shifting growing seasons, and increasing pest infestations. These aren't future hypotheticals, they're with us now. This past year marked the third consecutive year of drought for much of the state. And as of February 1st, this winter's snowpack is running between 30 and 50% of normal. Weather is the single most important factor explaining the variance in yield or the extent of disease. For today's webinar presentations and discussion, we'll focus on how AI-enabled approaches can help growers prepare and adapt to increasing climate variability and extreme weather now and in the future. For as long as agriculture has existed, better weather forecasts and the ability to adapt to weather and climate has been something close to a holy grail. If we could reliably forecast conditions weeks or months in advance at a scale that actually matters to a single farm, it would be truly transformative. And if we take that one step further, imagine tailoring crops that are best suited to the specific conditions of each farm, both today and the climate that we know is coming. AI is now pushing those boundaries in ways that we could have barely imagined even just a few years ago. So for today, we're going to tackle that. We're going to look at those challenges and those opportunities. And we're very fortunate to have four outstanding speakers. Each brings a different and complementary perspective. They'll introduce themselves in more detail later, but very briefly, we're going to start with Dani Gelardi from the Washington Department of Agriculture, who will provide an overview of the state's climate resilience plan for Washington agriculture. Andrew Nelson is a fifth generation farmer and software engineer who will ground us in the real world impacts of weather and climate and the decisions that farmers have to make every single day. Amy McGovern is the lead AI and meteorology strategist for the nonprofit Brightband and the director of research of a research institute on AI at the weather prediction at the University of Oklahoma. She'll share what's becoming possible with AI-driven weather prediction. And we'll end with Brad Zamft, CEO and co-founder of a company using AI in plant breeding to develop crop strains that can withstand the kinds of climate stresses Andrew is already managing on the ground today. Before we begin, I have a request for all of you again, reminding you, please use that Q&A box. Get the thoughts in there right away so they can accumulate during the presentations, and we'll take advantage of your input to expand it to all of you in our half-hour discussion at the end. We very much want you to be part of that conversation. A reminder to each of the speakers, please start your presentation with a short self-introduction. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dani Gelardi from the Washington Department of Agriculture. It's yours, Dani. Take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. As Brad said, I'm Dani Gelardi, and as the soil and climate scientist for the Washington State Department of Agriculture, I was asked to be here today to do a little stage setting and provide context for what climate change means for Washington agriculture. It is going to be a very high-level whirlwind overview, all of climate change impacts and all of the potential solutions in 8 minutes. But if you're interested in learning more, we released our climate resilience strategy last year with an exhaustive accounting of the science, what farmers and farm workers are experiencing, and what we can do about it. So let's set the stage. As many of you know, Washington has incredibly diverse growing regions. This precipitation map shows rainfall that ranges from 10 inches per year in the east to nearly 200 inches in the west. Combined with our stunning geologic diversity, these climate gradients have produced hundreds of different soil series, each suitable for growing different kinds of crops. And to be exact, we grow over 300 different types of crops. Though many people think of us as the apple state, we are also the #1 producer of blueberries, hops, and onions. Over 25% of our land is used to grow winter wheat. Cattle, milk, and eggs are also among our top products, and we are the #1 producer of aquaculture. With that diversity in crop and animal production, you can imagine that these systems are impacted very differently by climate change and require very different kinds of support to stay resilient through these challenges. Broadly, to the west of the Cascades, there are an increasing number of floods, which threaten livestock, infrastructure, and water quality. There are also unprecedented heat waves where historically homes didn't need air conditioning and farms didn't need to supplement with irrigation. On the east side of the Cascades, there's also increasing heat with pretty big consequences for those systems that rely on just 10 inches of rain per year. There are also increased frequency and severity of weather extremes and wildfire. People think of Washington as the cool, wet state, the evergreen state. And while that was never true across every region, it is increasingly less true statewide. Under a high emissions scenario, for example, we are looking at about a 10-degree increase in average annual temperature in 60 years. To put that in perspective, let's talk about the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Historically, in Seattle, there was one day above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and in Spokane, there were 16. But that shifts to 22 days above 90 in Seattle and 73 in Spokane. As civilians, we know that is hot and uncomfortable, but for farmers, that also means a lot of extra planning on how to water crops, keep livestock cool, prevent fruit from burning, manage an additional generation of crop pests, and keep workers safe. You can see in the blue that we are expected to receive slightly increased precipitation in the future. Slightly wetter against the backdrop of much warmer has major implications for Washington agriculture. Here you see the amount of water stored in our mountains as snow is expected to dramatically decrease. So you have overall snowpack decreasing, peak snowpack shifting earlier, and precipitation falling as rain rather than snow. Simply, this means more flooding and more drought. It means less water available during the summer when it's needed most to water crops, and of course, the associated risks to human health, environmental quality, and farm profitability. The science on what we can expect for Washington ag is getting better all of the time, and you'll hear more about that later. But we also wanted to learn about the on-the-ground impacts and innovations. During a statewide listening session, 6 listening sessions, a survey, and work with the Farm Worker Innovations nonprofit, we captured the voices of over 400 farmers and 200 farm workers. And unsurprisingly, we heard a lot about 2021. I don't want to dwell on the gloom and doom, but 2021 provides a really important case study in how different climate change can impact one system from the next. In 2021, a historic drought hit our state very hard, and Washington wheat yields were reduced by 40%. 97% of wheat farmers who responded reported reduced crop yield, and 21% reported a total crop loss. In June of that same year, Washington coast experienced its lowest tide in 15 years. Now, that's not about climate change, it's just a normal lunar phenomenon, but unfortunately, it happened during the hottest air temperatures on records. And during this heat wave, shellfish all along the coast were exposed to 108-degree air, causing a mass die-off of both wild and farmed shellfish. And the heat wave didn't just impact crops and livestock, but people, farmers and farm workers. In 2021, we saw heat-related worker compensation claims spike to the highest on record. That same year, wildfires consumed over 674,000 acres, especially on our rangelands. And we were not out of the woods by winter. While a historic heat wave was responsible for many of those events, in November, there was also historic precipitation and stressed dike infrastructure failed, drowning hundreds of livestock animals in Canada and Washington. Of course, climate change alone is not responsible for each of these events. In some cases, it's aging infrastructure, it's human-caused wildfire, or it's just bad timing. However, the backdrop of climate change creates conditions in which disasters are more common and more severe and exacerbate existing risks. It is important to talk about these challenges because, as Brad said, they are real and they are already happening and we can't ignore them. But there is also so much opportunity. In Washington, we have certain geographic advantages where other states may experience some of these challenges to a greater degree. This means that with a little strategic planning, Washington can become an even more important player in local and global food security. We have the Columbia River, we have diverse crop production, we have sources of state climate funding, and importantly, we have a strong track record of science-based partnerships, all of the people in this room. And the most innovative farmers. During interviews, we heard incredible stories about climate change preparedness. Over 55% of our respondents reported trying new soil health practices, for example, and 43% in making on-farm irrigation and efficiency investments. Farm workers also reported innovations to stay safe, from what they wear to how they consume water. But of course, with the scope of our challenges, additional support is needed in new and creative formats. We asked people, what do you need to enhance farm resilience? One farmer responded well when they said, farmers are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and we're being asked to bear the brunt of investment while prices stagnate and inflation makes the cost of production almost impossible to make a living. Again, this shows that climate change is a threat multiplier and makes existing issues harder to overcome. During interviews, unsurprisingly, farmers asked us not just for more funding, but more flexible, higher quality, and easier to access funding. We heard about the need for more predictive models and better early warning systems. During interviews, many farmers described the lack of crop-specific research and about the decline in local on-the-ground help. As we do in government, we took everything we learned and put it into a plan, the Climate Resilience Plan for Washington Agriculture, with 6 goals and 27 measurable actions. Everything from increasing emergency preparedness to promoting on-farm conservation, training and protecting an agricultural workforce, and preventing pests, weeds, and diseases. There is no shortage of way that technology and AI can support these goals. Think of our strategy like a playbook. Are you an AI hammer looking for an agricultural nail? Well, we have 27 strategic nails for you. To achieve climate resilience, we are going to need place-based and adaptive solutions, more funding, more focus, and most crucially, more cross-sector collaborations, especially from people in this room. Climate resilience is food security, worker safety, economic vitality, and environmental health. Follow this link or QR code to read the full plan, including the many quotes from our farmers and farm workers. And thank you for having me here today. I hope, like me, you are excited to hear from the next presenters.
Super, Danny. That was awesome. What a great overview to start us with. So next up will be Andrew Nelson. Andrew is a fifth generation farmer and software engineer who will ground us in the reality of climate impacts on the farm and the decisions farmers make every day. It's yours, Andrew. Go ahead.
If I unmute my audio, it works so much better. Thanks, Brad, and thanks, Danny, for such a great overview on Washington State Ag. I'm really going to talk more about it on my farm. All these pictures and everything that I go over is something that I've been trying out on my farm. So I'm a fifth generation farmer in Eastern Washington State. These are some of my fields, and that's my old drone, but it is such a pretty picture. I can't stop using it. And I am also an active software engineer. So I work with UW IT in their data analytics and integrating AI and kind of making the best use of data within the university. And then I run our 7,500 acre farm as well. I have worked with Microsoft Research and continue to work with a lot of universities across the US to kind of do everything we can in technology to try to help farmers. So that can be anything from University of Washington. I've worked with them on a crop camera. WSU, I'm currently doing a project with them on a autonomous sprayer. And University of Illinois, I'm working with UIUC with their Crop Wizard project, which is an AI project. And then we've actually spun off something called Ag Answers to kind of take that to the next level. So what I wanted to do was kind of go through these today, near term, and further term as I see it on my farm. So as of right now, I am currently using AI for microclimate predictions on my farm, which is helping a lot with our rolling hills because the weather forecasts are, not at my crop level. They're for about 10 meters above ground level and don't really accurately forecast freezes across my farm. So we've integrated AI to help with those microclimate predictions of where my weather sensors are at. And then I can make sure that a frost isn't coming when I'm wanting to, for example, spray a crop protection product on my field because it can either make that not as effective or it can damage my crop, usually both. So the background here is a pea field as seen from above. And to protect it against grasses, we spray something on there. And if I spray it on and then I get a frost within 48 hours, it will simultaneously not kill the grass and yet kill my peas. So it's a very important thing for me to do and be able to check. And it's helped a lot, especially as our temperatures seem to be a little less predictable than they used to be in the springtime. We're getting these odd later frosts, yet we're having warmer temperatures sometimes in April than we usually do. Um, and I do have to apologize a little bit because this will go into inputs and climate on our farm, but for a farm, they're just so closely related. So we've been using AI to detect weeds on our farm. The specific AI that I use was with Microsoft Research, but there's a lot of companies across the state and the nation that are providing this as a service where they can fly your field, give you a map, which is shown on the right side there of one of my fields. And that's where the grassy weeds were in my wheat field. And so I was able to only spray those little specks that you see across my field. And this field from the bottom to the top is a mile. And so I was able to reduce my chemical use on that by, 80 to 90% and get the same effectiveness. Because if there's no grassy weed, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything to my wheat, but it doesn't kill any other weeds. It's not protective. If a grass comes up later in that spot, it's not going to have any sort of control on it. So that has saved us a lot of time and a lot of, use of diesel when doing multiple sprays and stuff like that. I can get so many fields done if I have these maps in a day versus it used to take many days to be able to do it. And then as I'm getting these different types of seasons coming, I have been trying to consume as much research data as possible, but one person can only read so many research papers, and that's where I've really started to use natural language along with my crop advising. So that collaboration with UIUC, with their crop wizard, it contains all the information from all the land grant publications in our state. And I'm able to look at that and be able to ask it questions and it'll pull up a relevant, the research documentation. So sometimes it's from another state, when we're hitting higher temperatures and that we don't usually have, or a longer, drier period. So sometimes it's still pulling information from my local land grant, WSU, but other times it's able to source from other areas that are having similar or that had the same type of weather, but a few years back. And then the last one is the variable rate crop protection application, where I'm applying nutrients or inputs at the rate needed. So a great example is my Roundup use. So to properly kill a plant, you need to see the size of the plant and then pick the rate. Either, I'll pick it myself because I have enough experience, or a crop consultant can help you figure out, what the rate is to take care of, the plant or weed that you're trying to take care of. But what I'm able to do is utilize a drone to be able to see the plant sizes and then vary the rate. So that way I'll still get the same effectiveness, that same kill that I need before I plant, because it's hard to uh, get your crop growing in the field really well if you already have weeds or volunteer crops in that field. But I'm able to cut my Roundup use by at least 50% typically. And then sometimes we'll come into harvest time, and with our legumes, we're not able to control weeds in as well. My combines are green, but they don't really like any green vegetation going through them. So sometimes we need to kill the weeds in those fields. And that one I get an even better savings of where I can spray many more acres per fill, which makes me much more efficient. And yet I can still get the same amount of effectiveness on the weeds. The other nice benefit is the residues that we have on our crops, even though on fields where let's say I only saved about 50% on my Roundup use, we've seen the residues drop by 75% because really I'm targeting the weeds, and where the weeds are, there's less lentils. So for the near term, I really see this as becoming more of a proactive assistance. So with automated input prescriptions, it takes it from just me, the software engineer farmer, to more farmers within the state being able to do it. Some of these are regulation based, and some are regulation and AI based, where drones for a while have been able to fly much further than we can with regulations. But now, with the beyond line of sight rules that are getting rolled out, we're going to be able to have these drones more survey more easily versus the farmer having to go and get their drone license, go to the field, fly the drone, bring it back, put the data in their computer, then take it to their sprayer or their planter or their fertilizer machine, whatever they're trying to do. This is going to make it much more hands-free where the drone can go do it intelligently based off of weather forecasts and based off of the different cadence that you need for different crops. And it can get it all the way to, okay, here's the information that you need to put in your machine to go, boost your yield or protect your crops or whatever it happens to be. The next one's really that I'm very excited about is the AI guided robots in the field. So on the left side, on the right side there, you see iGen Element robot. It's an autonomous weeding robot that is solely powered by solar. Um, it is working in two crops right now, in cotton and then in sugar beets. But what I'm hoping that we can do, they're based out of Redmond, Washington. I'm hoping that we can use it in legumes because that is something that I'm having a major issue with as we get these longer dry spells on our farm. Some of the chemicals that work for legumes to keep weeds at bay are need rain, but I don't have rain. I'm a dryland farm in the Palouse region. So what this robot would do is it would drive around my field and be able to autonomously weed my field. And like I said, it's already doing it in other crops. Part of the biggest problem that we have is the to train the robot is, a decent cost factor. So one farm can't afford to do it. And it's even a little bit out of the realm for just our association for pulses in the US. But that will eventually come to fruition and it'll help us with two issues. I won't have to burn diesel to protect my crops. And the next issue that really helps is I don't have to put out a chemical that may or may not get rain. And if it doesn't get rain, I literally just wasted money on it. So that's something that I'm very excited about. The farm operations planning is what that spinoff called Ag Answers is working on, where it will be using AI for our farm logistics, labor, finance, purchasing, And it's really helping us get things as efficient as possible with the equipment that we have right now. And that's, one of the things I see all farms, as we experience these climate issues, as I experience droughts like I had last year and 3 years ago on my farm, things are very tight, and that's where this can really help us a lot to make sure that we're not burning extra diesel, that we're not causing more of the problem, and that we are using everything that we can to help our farm. And then the last one's those AI field scouts, which we worked with University of Washington Global Innovation Exchange, where we can have it go for us a little bit better to be proactive. And I'm going to be pretty short on the adapting because I am negative in time. And for the next two presentations are really kind of going over these. The AI acceleration, crop genetics, so that way we can have crops that, work better for our fields. And the forecasting for me, if I knew what we were getting in terms of rain in the next year, I could be so much more effective at placing my fertilizer. Last year, I spent probably almost six figures more on fertilizer than I needed to because we had this extreme drought. And if I knew that I was going to have it, then that would have fundamentally changed my economics for my farm. And also, when you put that nitrogen down there and it's not being used, then it can leach deeper in the soil. And it's an overall waste. And this would have been so much better if I could have figured it out. But I would just want to say thank you for your time, and we can go on to the next person.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was fascinating. I have a million questions myself. I want to recognize everyone putting your chat and your questions in the chat here, the Q&A. That's great. That's what we want to see. Have that conversation going. Keep us going on the agenda. So now we're going to move on to Amy McGovern, Director of the NSF Institute for Research on Trustworthy AI in Weather and Climate and Coastal Oceanography, and an advisor to the startup public benefit. Oh, that's not true.
It is true. You
It is
you said it
true.
was a nonprofit earlier, and I was going to correct you when I introduced
Oh,
myself.
okay. Thank you. Well, I'll let you do. So, Amy, take it away.
Okay, so I'm Amy McGovern. I'm a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and I am also director for the NSF AI Institute. And I gather that you hear about AI institutes from the others that are involved in WSAS. Um, and then I am also an advisor for Brightband, and I'll talk about that in one slide. I'm going to give you a hopefully 12-minute overview of the way AI weather is working. Just so you have a clue what the AI institutes are, we are a large $20 million investment from the National Science Foundation. We were founded in 2020. We're in our final year of it right now. All of those universities that are at the top there are involved in our AI institute. We have a whole lot of private industry that we work with, and then a couple of government labs that are on the bottom line there. And our goal has been trying to focus on what it means to develop trustworthy AI. So what does it mean for AI to be trustworthy? Why would it be trustworthy? Why is it not trustworthy? These are key questions as you're using the AI. And then Brightband, since he mentioned it was a nonprofit, it is not a nonprofit. It is a public benefit company. And I'm advising for them, and they are making AI weather forecasting tools available to all to focus on adapting to increasingly extreme weather. And I'm going to present some stuff from both of them. So maybe this slide is already well known to everybody in the audience, but maybe not. So I'm just throwing this out there. The $1 billion climate disasters is something that that NOAA was keeping track of until last year, and now it has been taken over by Climate Central. And you can get the graphics to show you how the $1 billion weather disasters are increasing every year. I note that they didn't put anything in Washington State because I guess there wasn't one last year in Washington State. But there's still a lot of $1 billion weather disasters. In order to qualify for this, it has to have cost $1 billion in damage. And uh, a lot of what we work on is trying to study these so that we can better improve the prediction of them. So just, I guess, since you had already pictures on drought and discussions of drought from Andrew, the question is, what does it mean for the AI to be trustworthy? And what does AI mean in general? And I'm really going to go into that question because I was told the audience didn't necessarily know how the AI weather methods are working, which I think is probably true unless you're studying the weather forecasting. I think that in general, people think that AI is large language models, and it's cool. I didn't know about the crop chat thing. Large language models are great, but it's not how AI weather models are working. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the AI weather models work. There is no large language involved in them at all. So they're encompassing a large amount of methods that are taking in a huge amount of data and trying to give you better decision making, better output, better predictions, and trying to provide timely, actual, reliable information. So this one's probably already well known, but just specific predictions that I have looked at. We work on improving hail prediction. I don't gather it hails very frequently in Washington, but the flood prediction we work on hails a lot in Oklahoma, by the way, a lot. We work on winter weather prediction, trying to improve, all of these events so that you can do an improved prediction and improve understanding of those predictions multiple days in advance, which is what you need in order to be able to do the preparation. Because we're not going to be able to stop the atmospheric river from coming and dumping on you. We're not going to be able to stop the hailstorm from dumping or the winter storm. But if you know in advance, then you can do a better job of protecting what's happening. So, with the theory of what I said that we're going to talk about how the AI weather prediction is happening, I think that given that the general understanding of AI is what people have interacted with as ChatGPT, I wanted you to see sort of everything that goes into a weather prediction model. Borrowed these slides from the European Center for Medium Scale Weather Forecasting. Um, this is just showing you some of the things which we're using to measure the weather. So if you're trying to do the weather prediction, which I feel like I could go in any order on these next 3 slides. I'll show you how it's done and how breaking the world up. You need to be able to understand what the initial conditions are. And one of the questions that could ask, well, how do you get it wrong so often? Because there's a huge amount of the world and not a huge amount of sensors to give you the information about each one of the pieces of the world. So this is just a small picture. There's satellite information. There's different satellites that are up there. I'm hoping you can see my mouse. There's aircraft that are giving you information. There's balloons that are launched from the ground. There's ships giving you information on the land. There's a lot of stationary weather observations. I think Andrew talked about the microclimate. You can get those stationary weather observations at a very small scale. There's radars. All that's just a small sampling. All of that goes into building the picture of what the atmosphere looks like right now so we can give you a better forecast in the future. And another picture I got from online of how the weather forecasting happens. This has got lots of words on it. You could ignore most of the words, especially since some of them probably don't mean anything. Orographic, for the record, just means mountains and terrain. But there's just pieces of everything that go into it. It isn't just that you need to know what temperature it is. In order to know what temperature it is, you have to know about the wind, you have to know about the clouds, you have to know what the water is doing on the upper parts of the atmosphere, you have to know if the land is giving off heat or what the land is doing at the moment. There's a huge amount of information that you need to know in order to make this work. So how does it actually work? You break the world into a whole bunch of cubes. I like to explain it as sort of Minecraft cubes. If you or your kids have played Minecraft, you could think of Lego cubes, however you want to do it. But in order to make this weather forecasting happen, it's not the large language model. It's called numerical weather prediction, and this is even outside of the AI. This is just numerical weather prediction running on very large supercomputers. You have all these little cubes, and the little cubes are simulating the laws of physics, and they're talking to their neighbors essentially because you're breaking the world into cubes, however sized you made them, and each cube transmits its information to the neighbor who can then pass that information along. AI does it a little bit differently, which we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. I think for the sake of time, I'll skip that. I was asked, before I get to the AI question, I was asked sort of how weather forecasting has changed over the last time. This was the best graph I could find going back in time. There are a couple of things to say about this graph. So this is just for an arbitrary scale of measuring accuracy improvements. It's a specific variable, but that is outside of this. It's just accuracy improvements, measuring the accuracy in the northern hemisphere, the tropics, and the southern hemisphere, and looking over time from the 80s up till the 2020, which is about when AI forecasting on the global scale happened as a revolution. And what you get out of this graphic, the shading is showing you the uncertainty in those forecasting, and then the lines going up are improving. So since the 80s to 2020 or 2021 when this graph ends, there's a tremendous amount of improvement for all of the areas that we're studying. The uncertainty has also gone down tremendously. It's still not there, and there's also still some really hard questions. And one of the hard questions is why are we doing so much better in the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere? And maybe if you're only thinking about the state of Washington, you might not think that that applies to you, but it does apply to you because the answer to that is there's a lot of lack of sensors in the southern hemisphere and in the tropics. There's just not as much data. And so if you're trying to get all the way down in scale to your farm, there's also not as much data at that scale. And so that decrease in capability is going to apply to you. Okay, so how does AI weather forecasting work? AI is not generally breaking the world up into the cubes and having the laws of physics simulate from cube to cube. The way that the AI data driven, that was supposed to say driven, I guess I was tired last night and it auto-corrected to driving. Pretend it says driven. Data-driven weather forecasting models is that they train on historical records of data. So there's an online data set from the European Center that has, it's called ERA5, and it has data from around the world that's supposed to be a relatively consistent set of what the world was looking like at a relatively coarse scale for the last 60 years. And the way the AI models work is that they take in that and they learn from this time step, this is what the next time step looks, this, and they do that for 60 years. And they learn based on the past what the future should look like. And there are a couple of different ways that people are doing that from like just going from whatever you got as input and trying to give you the forecast, say 5 days from now, or trying to give you what do you have as input and doing it every 6 hours, and they call it rolling it out all the way out to 5 days. Either of those are viable approaches, and you'll see them in different AI models. One of the things that's happening now, the revolution that's happening like right now, and I grabbed the slides that are from Brightband, say Brightband on them, is that people are trying to go from that nice, consistent view of the atmosphere to going right back to all of the observations and all the noise you can get from the observations. And can you learn directly from the observations? And so that's really where the future of the AI forecasting is going. And I think that this is very applicable to the farms too, because the farms are going to have those high resolution. If you can put in all your sensors that Andrew was talking about, you could get better microscale forecasting. So you've got the observations going in, and instead of going through physics and giving you some very consistent state of the atmosphere, which I won't bore you with the physics, and then creating a model, in the old days, this top row is what you did, breaking up into the cubes and creating a forecast. And then for a while, the AI revolution was taking all that physics-based state and then putting an AI model onto it. That's what I just showed you on the previous slide. Now, people are trying to go straight from the observations to a forecast so they can skip that middle part. Why? Because you might be able to get more data out of the observations. Right now, the estimate is that we only use about 5% of the observations in the simulated state. You don't need to worry about the variables that are on the left-hand side. These are just pretty pictures to compare. The pretty pictures that you can compare is the IFS is the current physics-based system, the traditional system that takes in all the observations and gives you a state of the atmosphere. And the one on the right that's labeled AIDA is the AI data simulation system, and it's giving you pure AI, no physics embedded view of the atmosphere. And they look relatively similar. That's what's amazing. We're still on the cusp of this. This is not like this is a product I'm trying to sell you. This is just still in the cusp, but it is really, really cool. This is bleeding edge. And it's running operationally. So we could give you a forecast. This was a forecast from last week, looking at that cold spell that came through the middle and eastern part of the United States. One of the other questions I was asked is how you know what you should trust. Well, there's deep questions here I could give you on AI2ES answers, and that involves a lot of working with your end users and making sure that you're meeting their needs. I was also asked to show some graphics, so I'm going to show some graphics, but for the sake of the fact that I can see the timer counting down, the rest of you can't, I'm going to switch to this one, because this one is on the Pacific Northwest heat wave that was already talked about. As part of my work at Brightband, I've been developing something that I don't expect everybody in the audience to want to go do. It requires you to know Python, but it's a tool that you could access online that would enable you to compare some of the AI models. And the tool that we're developing is a way to compare the different AI models or physics-based models on their forecasts, both for overall events and for specific events. So looking very specifically at the Pacific Northwest heat wave, we could ask questions of how well did the AI models get the forecasted temperature? How well did they do overall? That's the root mean squared error. And how well did they do on forecasting the low of the temperatures? And on this graphic, you don't even need to know what the numbers necessarily mean. You just care about the differences. If it's red, it's bad. If it's blue, it's good. And that's good. So the majority of the AI models did pretty well. But then let's say you've got some company trying to sell you an AI model and they say, oh, this model X did really well all the time. You'd like to see how well it really did on the events that matter to you. And the Pacific Northwest heat wave is one of those events that matters to you. Okay, briefly. Atmospheric rivers matter a lot as well. And I have a short overview of just doing that exact same thing, but I think this is probably a more interesting thing that you can look at. This is the forecast evolution of an atmospheric river over time for the different AI models. And so the top row is HRES, which is considered to be the truth. Sorry, the truth is over here on the upper right. The HRES is the physics-based model. Then you have 3 AI models on there. And what's really, really interesting, if you want to be able to protect your crops from these atmospheric river flooding events, is that, for example, this model called GraphCast didn't even see this particular atmospheric river very at 10 days in advance. It starts to see it later, but the other models are starting to see a signal of it, and I think that's pretty cool. And now I've gone negative, so I'm going to go really fast in the last two slides. The really fast is I was asked about how well you can forecast at the different scales, and this is a graphic just showing that daily forecasting does pretty well on the like 0 to 7 days, and then from 7 to 10 days it does pretty well. As you get out to 14 days, it's pretty average. You can do better when you get into the like multi-week forecast, but again, your skill drops down because there's just so much you're depending on. And then seasonal forecasts are really hard. They're getting better, but they're hard. And I think for the sake of the fact that my timer is stopped, I'll just stop there and say that I think we need to keep doing this.
Okay, super, Amy. Yeah, it's amazing how fast AI forecasting has reached and exceeded in many cases what took 50 years to do with conventional numeric weather prediction. And thank you for highlighting that rapid progress that we're seeing. So, moving on to our final panel presentation will be Brad Zampt. I guess we're going to call him Brad Z, and I'm Brad C. But anyway, Brad is the CEO and co-founder of Heritable Agriculture, and he's going to connect a few dots on crop adaptation. So go for it, Brad. Z.
Thank you all. Can you see my screen okay?
Got it. Yep.
All right. So thank you all for inviting me here today. My name is Brad Zampt. I'm the CEO of Heritable Agriculture. We are a spin out of Google X, and we work on the crop side of climate adaptation. So integrating all of this weather and all of the beautiful information to help better adapt crops. And basically, that's what we're sort of talking about today. There's a fundamental mismatch between the speed at which the climate is changing versus how long it takes us to adapt crops. So on the right here, you see Washington State has done a half maturity zone change in the last 13 years, whereas on the left, you see kind of standard timelines for processes in the crop improvement process. To discover just the basic research, the fundamental drivers, the genetic drivers of rugose disease resistance, which is a virus that has decimated the tomato industry. It took 3 years just for the beginning discovery phase. For longer growing things like trees and nuts and stone fruit, the cycle to just breed those things is over a decade. So you can imagine annual crops we're iterating on every year, things that are happening in forestry and in those markets. It's taking 14 years to get the similar kind of learning. And just in general, developing new fruits, veg, things like that, we're talking about on the order of a decade, whereas again, the climate is changing much faster than that. And the fundamental reason for that is that the traditional crop development system relies on statistical/linear models, largely that associate the DNA, the markers, the things that are happening in the genome to the emergent behavior, the trait of the plants, skipping all of the steps that we know about biology, and also the incorporation, the characterization of those processes with environment is usually done later in the stage of the crop development process. At Heritable, we're changing all of that. We have shown in real plants, in real fields, that we can do this kind of trait discovery process in months, not in years. We can, especially for plants that have a long cycle, we can reduce that breeding cycle by 80%. And as I'll talk about a little bit later in our strawberry program, we really think that we'll take that product development cycle from a decade. We're going to try to make a new strawberry variety in 3 years. And that really comes down to the fact that we use these nonlinear artificial intelligence-based models that respect the fact that we know that biological systems don't act in a simple linear manner. We embrace the fact that we can now measure many more things about the inner workings of a plant, not just the DNA, but the RNA and all the other molecular processes that are happening. And we have the ability to integrate the environmental information at the outset from the remote sensing revolution that has been going on. So in a nutshell, this is what we do. We take all of that beautiful revolution that we've had in measuring molecular information, measuring things about our planets. We integrate that through artificial intelligence, but we make our models with the end in mind, being able to model how a trait emerges in a real plant, in a real field, and to zoom down, what are the underlying genetic mechanisms that are creating that trait. So here's two of our three products. I just don't have time to go into our third product, but this is an animated. If you can see, we can make a digital twin of a plant anywhere in the world to 10-meter resolution. If you're using an existing set of plants, existing varieties, that we call that product placement, and that just allows you to better simulate how your collection of plants is going to live in the world. But we can use the same technology to model what would happen when you make a cross and then you have the children of two parents. That's called breeding. And then our trait discovery platform here, you can see these individual markers or parts on the chromosome that are no longer what's traditionally done, which is associating large swaths of the genome to the variation that we see, but it's actually understanding the individual genes that are contributing to it. So in a sense, I took some slides from the earlier talk just to make it more, integrated with the Washington State perspective. We can use this remote sensing of weather, the remote sensing of soil. We grow diverse panels of plants because the more difference we see, the better we can train our models. We take the genomic information, and then the point is, can you model both where apples are best, but other places that perhaps you could grow apples in Washington State, for example, or where you would grow them in future climate scenarios. Again, these are screenshots from our product placement breeding type of product. We train on a diverse set of different crop varieties across different environments. We can then simulate how they'll work around the globe and even zoom down into a particular field. Once again, this reduces the number of field trials that you'd have to do, allows you to open up new markets, and allows you to adapt to future climate scenarios. The trait discovery functionality that we have, again, embraces the diversity. We grow diverse sets of crops. It does take the genetic information, but it also embraces all of the other molecular information, mostly RNA, but we do things like the modifications to DNA, the proteins, and the chemicals called metabolites. And the purpose is, if you have an apple that tastes delicious and grows very well in Washington State, but you want to understand exactly the mechanism of disease resistance for a particular pathogen that might be invading the state, or if you want to shift the maturity, you want to keep everything else the same, but you want to mitigate the risk due to an early frost or something like that, you need to have very fine-tuned control, and you need to understand the exact drivers of that variation instead of trying to do breeding, which modifies vast swaths of the plant. And so as a use case, here are the maturity zones in corn. I'm just using the corn example because it's the one that we actually have results on. And you can see that a 5-day shift really matters as these maturity zones change, and they have changed over time. Being able to understand how to modify the maturity of your plants is going to become more and more important. And so we did that. We grew this diversity panel of corn in collaboration with the University of Nebraska. And we went ahead and validated our models using gene editing. Gene editing is not a major part of our product development platform, but we do use it for validation quite a bit. And you can see that we moved the flowering time of this corn from 56 days to 92 days, and we had one that never flowered. And then this is even more recent data. We actually made a series, a titratable flowering time across about 8 days. And so in comparison to the traditional, what's been happening, Corteva actually put out a very nice paper in 2021 where they showed that across their pipeline over 18 years, they had 1,600, almost 1,700 genes that they thought were associated with specific traits. 22 of them worked in the greenhouse. One worked, it was actually for flowering time in the field. We have shown 3 for 8 in corn, and a separate study that I don't have time to go into, 3 for 3 in the leafy greens. Putting this all together, I'm really excited to talk about the strategic alliance that we're doing with an eminent, really world-class breeder in Italy. They have great market share and they make great strawberries for Europe. But the growers in Ontario that grow indoor in glass houses don't have the right genetics that they want. So we sit at the middle there and we rapidly adapt the hard work that they've been doing over decades towards the needs of these growers. And it's a wonderful collaboration. It's becoming really, really big. And it's the kind of thing that we want to do multiple times. And so what we're looking for, we're open for business, is folks who are willing to enter into these deep partnerships between people that have genetics, the people that need genetics, and we bridge that gap. We don't want to be a service provider. We really want to go into this together. And in particularly, we're really looking for partners in apples. We think that we're ready to do that. Of course, blueberries, we're already in the berry space, and we have interesting conversations going on in grapes and wheat. Bringing it back to the climate story, everybody, every single breeder that I've talked to stays up at night because of some disease resistance. Everybody's worried about a particular abiotic stress, drought, heat, flood, frost. And in this particular context, by bringing it to indoor growing, we're allowing local production of strawberries in the Northeast, i.e. local production. I'll just end with some provocations, my thoughts on trends for AI and climate and agriculture. I have a little bit of a industrial or commercial bent as we are a startup. I think the next big exit, the next huge startup that becomes big in ag is going to do this from climate adaptation. As I said, everybody I talk to is losing sleep over some pest, and the food system that better places their genetics and the management in the context of the environment, as we've seen in the previous talks today, that food system is going to make great competitive gains. I don't think that this is going to come from a go it alone, winner take all kind of thing. We're working in a partnership context. We work with growers, we work with the people that have the access to the market, and we work with the people that have the starting point on the genetics. We're seeing much bigger need to just place products in the right environment and the right managements, not even doing breeding. We see significant need in making new breeding programs for future climates and new geographies, and actually editing, I think, is way later stage. In terms of just broader opportunities, I think, for folks in AI and climate, of course, as we've seen today, being able to predict the weather in the intermediate term, not the next 2 weeks, not climate over the next few years, but over the season, will have huge impact. Being able to model the movement of these pathogens across ecological boundaries, treating the genome like ChatGPT treats the human language, really understanding the grammar and syntax of that conveyance of information. We're working on that. How the soil evolves and interacts with the plants over time, how the ecosystem evolves. Let's not underscore the need for just being able to clean and integrate data. There's a huge amount of data out there. I think there's a huge opportunity to just clean that up and accelerate analytical pipelines. And I'm seeing this happening a lot. I think most major seed companies are using these LLMs to organize and to uncover the underlying trends in decades of agronomy notes. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the question and answer session.
Super. Thank you, Brad. Fascinating, scary in a good way science. You need your white lab coat, I think. It's really cool stuff. Um, so what a great panel. I think they've highlighted just lots of opportunity, challenges in this new space, quickly evolving space. So first, please join me in just thanking the panelists for the great presentations. So, you know, a great start. We have 30 minutes, so we're in pretty good shape as far as getting into our Q&A. Before I jump into that, I do want to just take a moment to introduce and welcome another Washington State Academy of Sciences member, Ruby Leung from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. She's nationally known for modeling and analysis of climate and hydrological cycles. So I'm inviting her, and I think she's expecting to sort of take part in this discussion as we move ahead in these next 30 minutes. In addition, we also have our panelists. In addition to them and Ruby, we have a number of our planning committee members have helped plan this webinar series. They're going to be here and help me and help harvest the questions and answer some of the questions in chat. And we will see how it goes in orchestrating this next conversation. So, well, we're getting organized on that front. I do have a question that comes up in my mind quite often when I look at and I go to different seminars or different things, and there are so many exciting things going on. Again, from an atmospheric science perspective, I look at the gains that we're seeing in weather. And Brad, you just mentioned the impact if we could really forecast skillfully with remove enough uncertainty that you could start making some of these decisions through a full growing season. We're making amazing progress. We talk about the microclimates. We talk about some of the technology that you're working with. And to me, it's a little just mind-boggling in where do we start? Where do we focus? There are so many opportunities. So I'm just going to ask the panelists sort of, if you only had one choice, one opportunity, and not today's sort of technology, but if you look out just a couple years at the pace things are going, what is the one that you would really highlight to be where you're pretty confident it's going to be successful, but also it's going to have big bang for the buck? So anyone want to jump at, have a favorite or something that you're ready to put your retirement fund into?
Well, I'll give you a start answer. The AI data assimilation and the AI straight the forecast straight from observations, I think they are right on the cusp of becoming amazing. And I think that they're going to give us a lot of promise above the what we can do with just sticking with the traditional take your obs, put them into DA, put them into a forecast.
So
Yeah.
Andrew's a real live farmer. I'd like to hear what he thinks, as opposed to
Yes.
what we theoreticians think.
Well, thanks for putting me on the spot now. For me, it's the practical things of robotics, being able to help with a couple different things, the effectiveness of chemicals, especially emergence chemicals, and labor issues in terms of cost, and just even if I pay whatever I want, whatever I wish I could pay, I can't sometimes find enough people. So that's where I think for those ones. But if I could get, let's say my dollar would definitely work, a long range forecast that's accurate would be like a huge game changer for me. Um, because then I can take all these tools that I already have and make them so much more effective.
What's long range?
Growing season, so 3 months.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else want to go out on the branch a bit here?
Well, that particular question got asked in the chat about what the long range is.
Yeah, I see that. You want to take a shot at it now? I was going to get loop back to it, but sure. Yeah.
Just
Uh,
that I think it would be great to get growing season range out there, but it's really, really a hard problem. And I get asked a lot why weather forecasting is so hard at these scales, right? If as you get farther out in time, you're looking at more seasonal things and more larger scale interactions that are happening over the globe. The ENSO, the MJO, all the things you hear about. Like, is it an El Nino or La Nina year? The things you hear about. But there's still small scale interactions that matter, and there's not enough. There's too much uncertainty in what's actually going on in the world and actually at the lowest level scale to be able to give you really super accurate forecasting that far out, right? You can give trends, but it's harder to say it's going to rain on your farm 2 weeks from now. Don't believe it. And if I tell
Yeah.
you it's going to rain on your farm a month from now, really don't believe it.
If it
Yeah.
says 3 days for me, I still don't believe it because I'm in the Northwest. So
So Brad, to answer your question, I think that long range weather forecasting is obviously a holy grail. A lot of folks have worked on it, and it will continue to be um, uh, massively impactful. And the potential of it transcends agriculture, right? I mean, there's many reasons why we need to get that right, but it is statistical fluid mechanics. It's a very complicated, chaotic system. I think maybe, or one answer to your question is kind of like what's here now and what are you going to see in the next couple of years? Somebody put that in the chat, in the next 2 years. What we do see now, what is here, is this LLM world, is these agents, are these things that um, Andrew talked about how he's using these things for agronomy decisions and as a help. Um, and so just the integration and the collection of massive disparate amounts of agronomy, weather, I mean, the things that are in PDFs from 1950s, now Gemini can read that stuff. You don't need to have some fancy, you don't even spend any time doing optical character recognition. So we're just going to very quickly over the next 2 years see all of the research and all of the information that we've been collecting over decades be integrated, distilled, and being better utilized.
I think one of the other big benefits that I see with the more general AI is making things more accessible to all farmers. So, like being able to interact via voice and be able to interact with the technology that, I've built systems that for my own farm that I wasn't letting up, having other farmers use because they would look at all the forms and be like, "Ugh, no." Or there were systems that like I would like to use for a farm and I didn't because it would take me a couple minutes per sprayer fill, for example, and that equates to one less sprayer fill for a day, which is significant. And so these make those tools so much more effective and so much more helpful that, hopefully more farmers can use it.
Yeah, to sort of piggyback on Andrew's answer, it seems to me like AI is not necessarily a brand new tool, but a factor that's going to help us overcome barriers to adoption of existing tools. So variable rate technology, for example, has been around for a while. Many companies have come and gone. There's a million different kinds of sensors, overwhelming amount of data, and still we see pretty low rates of adoption. On the administrative end, if you want to fly a drone, for example, you have to have your FAA license and you have to take blood tests to make sure you're not drinking while you operate the drone. There's so much paperwork that I think AI can step in to help with. And then on the physical AI side, you have all of this data that doesn't necessarily speak to the equipment you have. And so I think AI has a real role to play in sort of helping people retrofit their equipment or sort of helping them see what needs to be added to sort of have data harmonization between all of the sensors and what they have on their farm already.
I'd like to come back to robotics again for a minute and put Andrew on the spot again. I wonder how much the scale of a farm and the nature of a crop impacts the ability to invest. Okay, so you showed us an Amiga, for example, and that's actually a $12,000 platform these days.
Yeah.
But it's kind of homebrew, right? It's a platform, and then you put on it the sensors or effectors that you want. The other extreme is the laser reader, which is $1 million device, and God knows they sold $100 million worth of them this past year. So people are buying it, but that's not for your farm. And
Yeah.
so more generally, how much does the scale of the farm and the nature of the crop impact the ability to invest in these efficiencies?
Well, I think there's a lot of companies out there that are looking at it different ways. Some are definitely going for just big companies, big, ag conglomerates to be able to sell to. They're going to buy that $1 million machine, which I did see one of them come up for resale for about 300,000. So that's a little bit of a depreciation hit right there. My thought is that some of these technologies can make it easier for farmers not to have to become and seem as large. So right now, my sprayer is built for about a farm in our area of about 8,000 acres, which is why I'm kind of around that range. I had my farm up close to almost 10,000 acres once, but it didn't make sense because I was too late for spraying or I needed to run two sprayers. And then it was a big waste of money having, a sprayer sit most of the time. And so my hope is with the robotics. There are some companies, there's one called Sabanto Ag that's out there that's taking smaller tractors, smaller implements, and they're like, yeah, if you're 2,000 acres, it'll work great for you. If you're 4,000 acres, run two of them, and I think that's where the robotics can really come to help. And like the autonomous weeder from Redmond, theirs are made to be set in fields, have one in each field, and it can take care of your weeding and your crop health and stuff like that. And that's where I'm, thinking that AI helps to ingest all the information and the robotics being smaller, it's also cheaper to fix. I had to replace one part on my tractor yesterday that cost $1,000 because it was such high strength steel. It was not a fancy part. To me, it looked like a bar. But it just had to be such high strength that the costs are just insane on them.
Great. I see Jim has his hand. I'm going to jump in real quick. Prerogative of the moderator, I guess. I want to go back to a comment that Brad Z made, which was about the chaotic system. Because I think, there's so much enthusiasm about getting all these, especially the seasonal and beyond sort of forecasts, and we don't get a free pass. The atmosphere is chaotic, and there are certain limits of predictability that we'll need to address. Having said that, in my understanding and conversations with Amy's and my colleagues, the sweet spot could really be in that sort of beyond 2 weeks out to, 4, 6, 8 kind of weeks where we really can start being more confident about dry periods, wet periods, not down to a farm scale, but what kind of a regime are you going to move in? I think that is I think an area that we should be really hopeful is to tackling some of that sub-seasonal work. As far as like when I was at Climate and Bear, one of the hybrids we were with was drought guard, a drought resistant corn, but it's hard to know what year to plant it when you don't know if you're going to have a drought because there's a cost. You put in a drought seed corn and your yield is not up. So some of these things are really held back until we get that holy grail. But anyway, I just wanted to comment and Brad emphasizing, yeah, it's a chaotic system and AI can't solve that. So Jim, you have a question. Jim Dooley.
Sure. Start with the comment, but today's webinar did a great job of introducing us to some of the opportunities and the potentially positive outcomes that will come from AI at various scales. And, last week and the week before, we identified the need for ag service firms, AIs, augmenting crop advisors and extension agents and that kind of thing. But so with what we heard today, what's the role of the service firms? And as Brad talked about, partnering as an alternative to service providers. So maybe Brad and Andrew could start with uh, the role of service firms rather than a farmer who's tech savvy like Andrew or has code competent kids. Uh, you know, we're not there yet. So we need that service or partnering or whatever. But what's your view of what that is and should develop in the next couple of years?
I have a very, as a startup CEO that spends a lot of time fundraising, I'm in a little bit of a different mindset than maybe. It's a hard business. A service business is a hard business. I think you could bootstrap it. I think you could get paid little bits of fees here and there. But for us to innovate and to really develop the next models that are a quantum shift in our ability to model the agricultural system, I don't see, there's not a business model that we've found yet on services. So if folks have ideas on how to incentivize that, I think that that's what's holding everything back. What we need is partners that are going to share in the value that we create, as opposed to us getting a fee for some services that we provide.
Yeah, and I've seen some service businesses out there. There's one called SkySense that does some of the drone mapping that I've done on the farm, but can do it for a farmer without them having to fly their own drone and such. The other big hurdle that I see is some of the people that they're looking to hire um, come in and go out, not necessarily at SkySense, but at, I've even had it with me with some interns I've had on the farm where farming hours are long and tough and hard. And, getting somebody in from college and then, they don't necessarily want those hours. And for me, there's nothing I can do about it. It's weather constrained. So, you know, going out at 6 a.m. in the morning and coming back at 8 p.m. is definitely difficult to get people recruited.
Okay, Inez Hanrahan, you have your hand up.
Sure. My question is for Dani Gelardi. Thanks for introducing the climate survey. That's a really nice project and really nice outcome. I also really like the strategic nails. I got two questions. One is, do you feel like these strategic nails work across scale? Oftentimes, I think the smaller independent growers, they're kind of forgotten, or things don't work very well for them. And the second one is, how confident are you that this nice document is not going to be used against farmers? Or in other words, how do you see this actually used advantageously rather than disadvantageously? Mostly it is turned around. While they're nice intended, but then how can you maybe color this in a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. I'll answer the second one first because I think it's a little easier to answer. I am fortunate to focus a lot on climate resilience and not necessarily climate change mitigation. Those are pretty often overlapping buckets, but in some ways, the resilience piece is a little less political and a little less easy to weaponize. And so a lot of what you'll see in the climate resilience plan are the product of 400 farmers and 200 farm workers asking us for pretty specific things like, early warning systems that come in multiple languages, or better funding for irrigation efficiency projects, things that are a little bit hard to weaponize. If what I'm hearing in your question is, will this turn into another series of regulations? I don't believe so. The other question about, are these strategies going to scale across all operations and cropping systems? Some of them, no, certainly not. And many of them, yes. I think if you dig into a lot of these, what we're asking for is more place-based and local tools. So like Andrew said about some of the companies that come and go, these relationships need to be built on trust. And it's really hard to have someone come in from a totally different state, a totally different system, and try to sell you something, whether it be a product or a service. I think having more people on the ground across the state is a huge, would be a huge, help us go a huge way in both climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I think it depends on the strategy. Some are going to be totally irrelevant for some systems, like, ocean acidification for aquaculture systems are not necessarily going to be relevant for dryland wheat systems. But I think there is something in there for everybody. I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. So I see Scott, and I'm going to grab one from the chat. So Scott, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I thought Andrew did a really good job of explaining the difference. One of the main differences between dryland farming and irrigated farming, where you can throw fertilizer on every time you irrigate if you want, whereas you have to, well, most people in your situation fertilize before or while they're planting, and you're kind of guessing at what your yield potential is going to be and how much nitrogen you need. I have seen equipment that farmers have bought to kind of knife in some fertilizer, like if it's winter wheat in the spring or something. Do you or your neighbors ever do that type of thing and at least do a split application, or is that too time consuming or
Usually our problem is in the spring, the same equipment is also seeding the spring crops. So part of the problem is the crunch timeline crunch and the fact that we have the rolling hills that the way you seed it in the fall, every spring is a different adventure on my fields. You have to approach the hills in different ways depending on what our weather has been like in the winter. So you can't as easily get it in between the rows. But yes, we have applied it in the early spring, especially if I'm able to get in like the March time frame, and then rain can pull it in. The hard times are when you can't get in then and you planned on that split application. So in general, I do put stabilizers with my nitrogen to try to make sure it stays there as long as possible and and I'm trying not to over apply too much. But yeah, that's always a balancing act.
thanks?
Okay, super. In the chat, we've seen a lot of questions about sort of uncertainty, confidence. How do the trust? Amy talked about trust. But I think we're all in general agreement that we're talking about the future, where we're headed. And with that really comes education. And Christy Morganson asked a question in the chat. What do you see, to the panelists, what do you see being needed in terms of AI skills for the general population? How do we break down these barriers? How do we get so it's not a scary sort of thing that you hear about on the nightly news? What guidance would you suggest for workforce training, for high school education, college education, and the practitioners too? How do we tackle that training issue? Anyone want to take that one? Amy, go ahead. Yep.
You're going to ask an education question, you're going to get a professor to answer. But I actually have a good answer to all of that. And just to demonstrate some things that have worked. AI2ES, when we were funded in 2020, we were one of the first ones out there to put out a community college certificate. And we actually had farmers taking our community college for certificates so that they would learn more about AI and the uses of AI. Is specifically in Texas because that's where we were funded to do this. So it was in South Texas. But it also was able to reach an audience that wouldn't typically be learning about the AI there. So that gets you high schoolers who then are doing dual enrollment and then can take it to college. That gets you farmers. We literally did have farmers in there. We had a nurse in there. Just people, the general public who want to learn about AI. And I think it's a really effective way to do that. I mean, I think we also need high school education. And so another thing we were working on is training high school teachers so that they could then go back to their classes and have more knowledge of what AI is about. And then, at the university level, I think it's really important that we have that. But I just wanted to say that this is existing and we've been testing it for 5 years and it's going really well.
Super. Thanks, Amy. And Brad.
I have a more general kind of, maybe I can get on my soapbox for a second. At least being in Silicon Valley, what's going on in AI right now is a disruption that may be of a lifetime. I guess the invention of the internet or the computer was, you can argue which is more disruptive. I don't know if that's helpful, but it is certainly like the world has changed. Last year is different than this year, and next year will be different than this year. So specific to that question, I think I'm of the opinion you have to completely lean in on the education piece. The way a student should learn going forward, it's not going to be about finding information. It's not going to be. It's going to be prompt engineering. It's going to be how to utilize AI, not how to. You won't be doing analysis anymore. You won't be using Excel anymore. You won't be writing emails anymore. You might not be writing reports anymore. So this is just a more general um, uh, thing, but we have to completely change our educational system going forward.
I mean, I think it's kind of
Okay.
like the
Okay.
calculator where, you still need to understand the basics to understand the output that you're getting. And so hopefully we can still teach the basics and, the general hunger for knowledge. And then that helps a lot with going forward.
Yeah, the interpretation and that general hunger of knowledge is human. I just think all of the rote part, all of the rote parts of that, looking things up, writing papers, summarizing things, all of that will be gone.
I will strongly disagree.
Okay. I think that we are at time. So I want to quickly thank everyone again. I think it's pretty obvious that there's not one individual, not talking to anyone here, who has all the answers. But I think it's also very clear that each of us has something to contribute to those answers. It really is a collaborative, cross-discipline effort to deal with. And I agree with you, Brett. It really is a once in it's total disruption as far as some of the trajectories and what we're talking about. And we've got to do it together. So I think that that's clearly part of the backing behind the webinar series itself is to have these conversations, bring the right communities together and work on this. So just a final thank you to the speakers. And also I want to definitely thank the Washington State Academy of Sciences staff for their hard work. They work so hard in setting all of this up. So I'm going to hand it back to Melanie.
That was amazing. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thanks,
Thank you also
Brad,
very
and
much.